Hello wonderful people. Welcome to another deep thought. This deep thought is a deep thought, at least deep time as far as my own lifespan is concerned. I've got this blast from the past. So this is a copy of Pagan Voice magazine. So I worked with Phil Hine and Rodney Orpheus on Pagan News, and then there was a point at which I think either Pagan News folded or there was a hiatus, and so I thought the project that Phil and Rodney had been involved with was amazing, and I kind of took it forward and developed Pagan Voice. This is an edition from December 1993. And this is a really interesting kind of point in history, a point where there's the whole kind of satanic ritual abuse craziness going on. We've got the second summer of love has not long happened, the rise of MDMA culture and tribal, the archaic revival, I suppose we would call it, taking the words from, of course, Terence McKenna. And interestingly, this is our special drugs edition. You can see that there, special drugs edition. And in it, I had pretty much forgotten, really, that I interviewed Terence McKenna. So there it is. There's the piece. So with your indulgence, and I won't attempt to do the voice, I'll just read the material so you can kind of get a sense of how it is. And I'll stick it online as well, as just as a scanned PDF or something. Obviously, I kind of look back at this and I think, oh no, I could have asked such much better questions. But hey, so it goes. This is quite some time ago. What's that? 27 years. Blimey. So Interface, which was our regular interviews feature with Terence McKenna. Terence McKenna has been called the psychedelic guru of the 90s. He is the author of the provocative Food of the Gods, The Archaic Revival and True Hallucinations. Not only does Terence maintain that psychedelics were important to the very development of human culture, but also that they hold the key to our future survival too. We caught up with him in between writing, lecturing and appearing live with The Shaman, so that kind of gives you a bit of a sense of... The Shaman incidentally is a band for our younger viewers, to ask him a few questions. So I asked, how did your interest in sacred drugs develop? And Terence replied, well, I came out of the 60s. I went to the University of California, which was about ground zero for that culture. Everyone was taking LSD and I became interested in other hallucinogens, and it quickly seemed apparent to me that the shamanic tradition of sacred drug use was much more interesting. I was fascinated by the vast unfolding landscapes in the eye of the mind, and I really didn't get that with LSD, but I find it in psilocybin and DMT. Since then, I've consistently felt that these hallucinogens are the most interesting, the most transpersonal, and indeed the most peculiar. So I asked, do you think that ancient tribal societies were based on one shaman using hallucinogens, or did all the members of the group participate? Terence replied, I think that in the early phases of human culture, when we were essentially nomadic and African and cattle orientated, that probably the entire population at some parts of the social year were intoxicated. It may be the role of the shaman comes with social roles specialising, or even the general lack of availability of the substance necessary. But I think the ideal social situation is one in which every individual is empowered to access these things on their own. So I asked, why has what you call dominator culture played down the significance of psychoactives as part of the human experience? And Terence answers, well, the dominator culture is very suppressive of anything that dissolves boundaries, because dominator culture is based upon the projection and maintenance of certain types of boundaries. My speculation in Food of the Gods is that essentially psilocybin acted as a kind of inoculation against the patterns of male dominance that are typical of primates. It wasn't that these behaviours in humans were genetically changed, but they sank below the level of self-expression because of the presence of psilocybin in their diet and, at a later stage, in their ritual practices. So I asked, how does paganism today connect to the use of sacred drugs as you describe it? And Terence said, let me say that that's not exactly immediately clear to me what the connection is between paganism and occultism derived from the Golden Dawn and that sort of thing. I can appreciate both approaches, but I don't seem to have terribly much to do with either. I deal with the questions around shamanism, where the question is raised by the genuine shaman, the intoxicated shaman, or the shaman who refuses intoxication in favour of flagellation, unusual circumstances, ordeals, so forth and so on. My opinion is that non-psychedelic shamanism represents a later phase of culture and is in fact shamanism on its way to becoming hierarchical priestcraft. Any of these other methods, yoga, flagellation, no doubt they lead to altered states of consciousness, but whether they deliver one into a state of consciousness easily mapped onto those provided by psilocybin or DMT, I would seriously doubt that. So I asked, what are the legal issues connected with psychoactives in the current climate? And Terence says, well, recently in the US it was found that animal sacrifice was acceptable under religious freedom laws, and the opinion of one judge seems to suggest that he would advocate a rehearing of a peyote case which failed, where the defence was made on religious grounds. So I think the Supreme Court would consider looking at psychoactive use, at least in a religious context. That would be very refreshing. I asked, how much does contemporary rave culture represent a part of the archaic revival of shamanistic culture? Terence McKenna responded by saying, I think that rave culture is a very broad-based social movement with far more going on than just a new dance craze. I think that this impulse to revitalise the archaic informs whole vast sectors of the 20th century life where it hasn't really been recognised. I mean, Picasso brought African masks to Paris in 1905. Cubism followed. Surrealism, Jungian psychology, jazz, body piercing, 60s rock and roll, 90s rave culture. All of these things are impulses towards the archaic. And rave culture is what's current and what's happening, and where the youth is making itself felt. It's simply a matter of people at the centre to project the right message. Drugs and images, so the thing is neither co-opted into commercialism or overshoots the mark into some kind of nihilism and burnout. If this can be brought off, I think we'll arrive at a millennium with an archaic pagan revival in full swing. I asked, how much do you think that the correct use of sacred drugs must be learnt? People like Leary discovered that with LSD, you can't simply take it and expect a miracle to occur. It works differently for different people. How does one need to train in order to get real insights out of psilocybin? Terence replies, well, I'm not sure about training. I believe we need guidelines. I believe that psilocybin should be taken in silent darkness at fairly high doses, and with an attitude of reverence and attention to detail and expectation of transformation. I don't think taking it in low doses, in noisy environments, in a social situation, dance, etc., is going to help. In fact, it's almost a strategy for suppressing the psychedelic. So part of what's changing society's attitude towards drugs is educating people on how to use these things, rather than just treating them as God's scourge upon the earth, and woe betide anyone who gets involved with them. The concept of recreational drug is driven by a consumerist society. What we really want is sacred drugs, or transformative drugs, or illuminating drugs. It's that kind of talk that made the ordinary instruments of dominator propaganda more nervous. I asked, was ancient archaic culture really any better than modern culture? Wasn't it just as bloody and nasty, but on a smaller scale? Terence replies, I believe that the partnership paradise existed in Africa, when the Sahara was much wetter and that society was driven by values created and maintained by psilocybin. In other words, orgiastic sexuality was possibly the norm, and this has the social effect of making it impossible for men to trace lines of paternity. As far as warfare in ancient cultures, there was violence, but on the other hand, around 10,000 BC, there occurs a point where assemblages of arrowheads are found in one place, and it's not an arrow factory. Previously, arrowheads are found singly, indicating that they were lost during the hunt. These deposits indicate warfare being invented at a cultural stage when the transition to agriculture was underway. And I think that this can be linked to the abandonment of psilocybin and the reappearance of alpha male dominator behaviour that is hardwired into the male primate and was suppressed when the mushrooms were part of the hominid diet and religion. I asked, if people accept your views, where might they go from this point? Terence says, well, if you're asking as a pagan, I think the real alchemy, the real magic, is the growing of psilocybin. So I think to beat criminal syndication and press hysteria, people, even in mushroom-producing countries such as Wales, should grow their own, and this is tremendously empowering. It makes supply continuous throughout the year, and out of that symbiosis of small communities and individuals and mushrooms will come the agenda for the archaic pagan future. It is a matter of opening channels of communication with the Gaian mind, to the logos of the planet. And to my mind, nothing else works. To my mind, if you're searching for the doorway, the mushrooms are it. The most life-enhancing advice I can give to your readers is to learn to cultivate the mushroom. It is true alchemy, true inner cultivation, true revelation, true evolution. And I've thanked Terence and put in the traditional disclaimer like you used to have to do in the olden days, saying, you know, we're not actually saying take drugs, but take drugs. So there's a picture of our man here. Delightful to speak with him, delightful to kind of connect with that story. So many things I'd like to be able to ask the man now, you know. Points of difference, points of tension, things to draw out from there. But, yeah, Terence McKenna, what a dude. Anyway, thanks for listening. See you soon.